On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched the most consequential military operation of the 21st century. Not against a non-state actor, not against a fractured insurgency, but against a sovereign nation of 90 million people sitting atop the world's most critical energy choke point. Within 12 hours, nearly 900 joint strikes had hit targets across Iran. Within days, the supreme leader was dead, the nuclear program was in ruins, and global oil markets were spiraling into a crisis unlike anything seen since the 1973 embargo. But the question now hanging over every capital, every trading floor, and every military command center is whether the destruction of Iran's capabilities has made the world safer, or whether it has cracked open something far more dangerous. To understand how we arrived at this moment, the thread runs back to October 2023. The Hamas attacks on southern Israel that month set off a chain of escalation that would, over the next 2.5 years, systematically dismantle the old rules of engagement across the Middle East. Israel moved aggressively against the so-called axis of resistance, degrading Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, while conducting targeted killings of Iranian officials, including strikes on the Iranian consulate in Damascus and the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh inside Tehran itself. Each action forced Iran into a reactive posture, and the direct missile exchanges of April and October 2024 shattered a decades-old taboo, the unspoken agreement that Iran and Israel would never strike each other's territory directly. Then came the 12-day war of June 2025, a conflict that, in hindsight, served as a dress rehearsal for everything that followed. After Iran pushed uranium enrichment beyond 60%, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion on June 13th, hitting nuclear facilities at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. Iran responded with a barrage of nearly 900 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones. Coalition defenses intercepted 80 to 90% of the incoming fire, but the sheer scale of the exchange marked a new era. The war ended on June 24th with a U.S.-brokered ceasefire, yet the damage extended far beyond the physical. The IRGC's structural weaknesses were laid bare. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's aura of invincibility, the carefully maintained image that had held the Islamic Republic together for decades, was shattered. And most critically, the June war failed to permanently dismantle Iran's nuclear aspirations. Enrichment sites were damaged, not destroyed. Production could be restarted. For Washington and Jerusalem, the conclusion was unavoidable. Anything short of a comprehensive campaign targeting the entire industrial base would simply delay the threat, not eliminate it. One final off-ramp remained. In early 2026, indirect negotiations took place in Geneva and Muscat, mediated by Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr al-Busaidi. Reports at the time suggested significant progress. Tehran was signaling genuine willingness to make concessions on its nuclear program. And yet the diplomatic window closed as quickly as it opened. President Trump expressed little enthusiasm for the Omani-led talks, and signals from Washington made it clear that the administration viewed a military solution as the more reliable path toward regime change and total disarmament. On February 27th, the final diplomatic push collapsed. 24 hours later, the first strikes began. What made the timing especially devastating for Tehran was what was happening inside the country. Throughout late 2025 and into early 2026, Iran was being consumed by the most severe domestic unrest since the 1979 revolution. Annual inflation had climbed past 50%. The rial was in freefall, losing 30% of its value in weeks. Drinking water shortages hit Tehran. Electricity blackouts rolled across provinces. Hazardous air pollution choked major cities. On December 28, 2025, protests erupted, not just from the usual opposition demographics, but from the traditionally loyal Bazari merchant class, from rural regions that had always formed the regime's bedrock of support. The government responded with an internet blackout, more severe than anything seen in 2019 or 2022, cutting phone lines and disabling Starlink terminals. Human rights organizations reported thousands killed by security forces in January 2026 alone. The regime was already fighting for survival before a single coalition bomb fell. That internal fragility became a central factor in the strategic thinking of its adversaries. Compounding the crisis was a succession question with no clean answer. Khamenei was 86. And the matter of who would follow him had never been resolved in a way that inspired confidence. When the war began, the supreme leader vanished from public view entirely, reinforcing the perception of a power vacuum at the state's core. For planners in Washington and Tel Aviv, this convergence of domestic collapse and leadership uncertainty created what they assessed as a narrow, unrepeatable window of opportunity. If this is reshaping your understanding of how this conflict came together, drop your perspective in the comments, because the story only grows more complex from here. Operation Epic Fury, the American designation, and Operation Roaring Lion, the Israeli counterpart, opened on the morning of February 28th with a ferocity designed to achieve what military planners called functional defeat within hours. Roughly 900 joint strikes hit Iran in the first 12 hours, targeting command and control nodes, air defense networks, and, most consequentially, the leadership apparatus itself. The defining moment of the opening phase was the killing of Ali Khamenei. Intelligence agencies had tracked the supreme leader to a high-level security meeting in Tehran, where he had gathered with dozens of senior military figures to discuss the collapse of nuclear talks and the suppression of domestic protests. The strike killed Khamenei along with Army Chief of Staff Abdulrahim Mousavi and other senior officials who directed Iran's strategic programs. On March 8th, the Assembly of Experts elected his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the third supreme leader. But the transition has been anything but orderly. Anti-regime media report that senior clerics, including Guardian Council members, have questioned Mojtaba's health and capacity to govern, with some calling for a collective leadership council instead. Mojtaba himself was reportedly wounded in the initial strikes, and the IRGC is widely believed to be exercising real authority in his absence. One of the most significant and unsettling dimensions of this conflict is the role of artificial intelligence in the targeting process. The U.S. military deployed a system known as MAVEN, which uses generative AI and real-time data analysis to identify targets and assess battle damage at speeds no human planning team could match. Within the first 4 days, the Pentagon struck more than 2,000 targets. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth described the AI-driven campaign as twice as deadly as the 2003 invasion of Iraq and 7 times as powerful as the June 2025 war. The implications of algorithmic warfare operating at this velocity, where machines process targeting data faster than humans can review ethical considerations, reach well beyond this single conflict. The campaign's second phase shifted focus from active military sites to the factories and production lines that manufacture Iran's weapons. This is where the 2026 operation diverges most sharply from the 2025 strikes. Rather than hitting enrichment facilities that could be rebuilt, the coalition targeted manufacturers of missile components, drone assemblies, and nuclear equipment. Prime Minister Netanyahu stated on March 19 that Israel was, quote, wiping out their industrial base in a way that we didn't do before. By March 13, U.S. officials estimated that 80% of Iran's total offensive capability had been destroyed, including up to 190 ballistic missile launchers. Netanyahu's public assessment was blunt. Iran possesses, quote, no capacity to enrich uranium or manufacture ballistic missiles. coalition forces established air superiority over Tehran and western Iran within 24 hours. Over 200 air defense systems were neutralized, giving Israeli aircraft freedom to deliver munitions directly over targets rather than relying on standoff weapons launched from distance. That dominance extended to strikes on internal security infrastructure, law enforcement command sites, and besiege bases, designed to degrade the regime's ability to control its own population. By mid-March, Hegseth declared that Iran has no air defenses. But if the coalition's offensive has been overwhelming, Iran's response has targeted something far more vulnerable than military bases. The IRGC's primary retaliation has centered on horizontal escalation, widening the geographic scope of the war to impose an unbearable economic cost on the global community. The weapon of choice is the Strait of Hormuz. On March 2nd, the IRGC officially declared the strait closed. No physical blockade was established, but the deployment of sea drones, anti-ship missiles, and direct attacks on commercial vessels created a de facto closure. Maritime traffic dropped 97% by mid-March. Protection and indemnity insurance for regional shipping was effectively withdrawn. At least 21 commercial ships have been struck, including the Maltese-flagged Safine Prestige and the oil tanker Sonangol Namibe, which suffered a sea drone strike near Kuwait that triggered a significant oil spill. Iran has selectively allowed certain Indian and Turkish vessels to pass while demanding all transit oil transactions be settled in Chinese yuan, a direct assault on the petrodollar system. The economic shockwave has been staggering. Brent crude, sitting in the mid-60s in January, surged past $100 and reached $115 by March 19. 20% of global oil and 20% of global LNG supply have been disrupted simultaneously. Regional production dropped by 10 million barrels per day. European natural gas prices doubled within a month, prompting EU leaders to call for an immediate moratorium on strikes against energy and water facilities. Qatar declared force majeure on its LNG contracts after Israeli strikes on Iran's South Pars gas field prompted Iranian retaliation against Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, the world's largest LNG facility. In Kuwait, the Mina al-Ahmadi refinery was hit by multiple drones on March 20th. The Gulf states, long positioned as safe havens for investment and tourism, are watching those narratives collapse in real time. The war has also activated major power dynamics reaching well beyond the region. Russia has emerged as a critical intelligence partner for Tehran, providing real-time satellite imagery of American warships and aircraft to enable more precise Iranian retaliatory strikes. Moscow has also supplied modified Shahed drone components to improve targeting. While publicly condemning the campaign as unprovoked acts of aggression, Russia's support remains bounded by the demands of its own war in Ukraine. Intelligence sharing takes priority over direct involvement. China has adopted a more restrained posture, emphasizing diplomacy and positioning itself as a potential post-conflict stabilizer. Beneath the rhetoric, however, Beijing has reportedly prepared to provide financial assistance and missile components to Iran. China imported up to 1.4 million barrels of Iranian oil per day before the conflict, roughly 80 to 90% of Tehran's exports. The war has forced China's smaller teapot refineries into crisis, and Beijing has responded by surging imports from Russia. Perhaps most strategically significant is what analysts call the yuan play, Iran's demand that straight transit be settled in Chinese currency. For Beijing, the broader picture may be even more favorable. the redeployment of advanced U.S. missile defense systems from the Indo-Pacific to the Middle East represents, in Chinese strategic terms, a substantial gain for its own regional security. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the moment, because the trajectory of this conflict is far from settled, and understanding the full picture is going to matter more with each passing week. For India, the stakes are different, but no less severe. Nearly 90% of India's crude oil is imported, and millions of Indian nationals live and work across the Gulf. The conflict has put roughly $50 billion in remittances at risk. Indian crew members have been killed and injured in attacks on merchant vessels, and workers throughout the region report fears of mass layoffs as energy operations shut down. New Delhi has responded with emergency helplines and direct diplomatic engagement with Tehran. External Affairs Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar noted that talks with Iranian authorities have allowed some Indian-flagged gas tankers to transit the strait. India is walking a tightrope, maintaining ties with Washington while positioning dialogue as a more productive instrument than military force. Amid the wider conflict, the United States has pushed forward with its post-conflict framework for Gaza. In January 2026, President Trump announced the Board of Peace, an international body to oversee stabilization and reconstruction. A 15-member national committee for the administration of Gaza, led by Dr. Ali Sha'af and composed of Palestinian technocrats, has been tasked with restoring public services and rebuilding civil institutions, deliberately excluding both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. An international stabilization force under U.S. Major General Jasper Jeffers has been established, with Indonesia committing 8,000 troops and Morocco leading a de-radicalization program. 9 Muslim-majority countries have pledged $7 billion, and the U.S. has committed $10 billion. But the framework has drawn skepticism. The UK and other G7 nations remain cautious, citing concerns about the board's mandate and the reported invitation of President Putin. The humanitarian toll demands clear-eyed accounting. The coalition maintains its strikes are targeted and precise, but civilian areas have been significantly affected. On the first day of the campaign, a primary school adjacent to an IRGC complex in southeastern Iran was struck, reportedly killing nearly 170 children. The Iranian Red Crescent confirmed 800 dead by March 3rd, including at least 310 civilians, though other organizations estimate the total exceeds 2,400. In Lebanon, where full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah has reignited, over 1,000 people have been killed since March 2nd. Residential towers and hospitals in Beirut have been destroyed. France has doubled humanitarian aid to 17 million euros, but the scale of displacement and suffering vastly outstrips the international response. If someone you know needs the full picture of what's unfolding across the Middle East, send them this, because the reality is far more consequential than any headline captures. So where does this leave the region and the world? The coalition's military objectives have, by most conventional measures, been achieved. Iran's nuclear program is in ruins. Its missile production lines are destroyed. Its air defenses are gone. Its supreme leader is dead. Yet the regime has not collapsed. Mujtaba Khamenei, however diminished, holds the title of supreme leader. The IRGC continues to launch missile barrages and coordinate attacks through its proxy network. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. And every day that persists, the economic damage compounds, not just for the Middle East, but for the entire interconnected global economy. Netanyahu's suggestion on March 20th of introducing a ground component raises the prospect of an even more destabilizing chapter. The old equilibrium, built on deterrence, proxy warfare, and the unspoken rules that kept direct confrontation at bay, no longer exists. What replaces it depends on questions that remain dangerously unanswered. How long the Hormuz choke point stays closed, whether the Iranian state fractures or endures, whether the reconstruction frameworks for Gaza and the wider region can hold under pressure, and whether the emergence of AI-driven algorithmic warfare has permanently altered the nature of conflict itself. The destruction has been precise, overwhelming, and fast. What comes after it will be none of those things.